I think since then, I've really felt like a senator.
Have you been able to get in little jabs about the Eagles versus the Steelers yet? Blah, and sheep?
There was a lot of that on the floor.
Thank you very much on behalf of every Buffalo Bills fan for beating Kansas City. When did you say, yeah, it's done?
My in-laws, who are in their 80s, want to know, what party is he?
I think among young people, there's just a sense of like, who's the person? What's their vibe?
Did you have political aspirations at that time?
I mean, dreams, hopes, fantasies, right? The local news in my home is a horror story every night. It's not what Northeast Philly was like when I was a kid. I want the block parties back. I want people to know everyone on their block. My dream and my vision is to bring that back.
Sorry I didn't dress up for you guys, but
I'm not wearing a tie.
These things happen.
Yeah, I'm not big on ties, but they make you wear them on the floor.
Guys, you can dress whatever you want to look on camera. I mean, we're just the fact that we're not wearing. I haven't worn a tie in like years.
Yeah, if you get elected to the Senate, they make you wear it on the floor. You have to wear it. You have to wear one. Caucus as well. Yeah, I mean, and it's important. It's important that we have formalities and things like that.
I mean, I get the decorum part, but I just never. Yeah, I never grew comfortable with it.
They kind of me,
Yeah, that's my thought.
Some of my collards probably aren't exactly the right size. They're like too tight, but it's fine now. But you know what I mean?
So when you walk into the building in Harrisburg, you get a book that says, "Oh, by the way, here's how you have to dress when you're going to be on the floor." I mean, what kind of things do you get as the new guy?
So my first caucus meeting was a week after I got elected because we had to elect our leadership slate the next year.
Yeah.
And I'm brand new. I'm seeing a lot of the senators for the first time in about a year. I spoke to the caucus in January when I was starting the campaign. And that's probably one of my favorite speeches I gave. I think a lot of candidates would just try to talk about their campaign, what they're trying to do. But I just talked about Northeast Philly. I walked in, I only had 45 seconds, something like that. I didn't even know I was going to be speaking. But I just said the local news in my home is a horror story every night. And essentially was laying the groundwork for hoping to build buy-in right with my caucus. I felt confident I was going to be sitting with them in a year. I wanted them to understand where I'm coming from, where I'm about. So back to my second caucus meeting, I walked in and I had no tie, and one of my colleagues, Greg Rothman, our new party chair, he's like, "Joe, come here. He brought me to his office. He's like, "You gotta have a tie." He gave me, and he let me keep it, and that's still my tie and my official Senate portrait. Yeah. So if anyone's looking to get me a birthday gift, we could use some more ties.
So
I don't think. How can I put this delicately? I don't think this was an issue until about 8 years ago.
Okay.
When we had the new lieutenant governor.
Nice.
Right.
Okay.
So,
that one.
Right.
That guy.
Right. So they had to sort of say, here are some standards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it all came after.
Well, I think it always had been I'm old enough to remember when, long before hoodies, what was radical was the then senator from the 1st District, Senator Fumo. He didn't like suits. Suits were like for a certain, but he always wore a blazer and tie and dressed well. I mean, he's probably wearing.
You can wear those on the floor.
Right. Was probably wearing a $10,000 blazer, but that was his thing. And that was like his sort of, I don't have to play by the rule. Right.
Yeah.
Was where, we wear a blue blazer and gray slacks and, look absolutely fine, right? You could go anywhere. But that was sort of the idea that you had to do that. And then the Fetterman and people like sort of with you as somebody had to, now Senator Fetterman, but explain when you're presiding as president of the Senate, you need to, you need to have a jacket and tie on.
No, I think it's good. As much as I don't like ties, I think it's good that we have standards that we say to people, this matters, this is important. And it's such a beautiful building. You should dress accordingly.
Yeah, we make a good point. I mean, I remember when I was interviewed by a newspaper for my former job as an athletic conference commissioner, I came in the blue blazer and the gray slacks, and they wrote up the article, dressed like the Ivy Leaguer he once was. Right. I was like, oh, well, okay. That's the first time I've ever been called an Ivy Leaguer.
Wow.
So that type of thing. We can decide whether that deserves applause or not.
Well, your parents were proud of it.
I'm sure they're. So I'm curious. You're as old as my son. And what made you say, okay, you went to school at Georgetown. Did you have politics on the mind the entire time coming through, or did it kind of evolve into a political career as it starts out?
I've always been drawn to it since I was a boy. I think my first memory was my grandpa. He died when I was pretty young, but he took me to City Hall. I used to work down there as deputy jury commissioner. I was just so enthralled with it. I think growing up in Philly, you really get this inspiration towards the American experiment, going to Independence Hall, Constitution Center, Liberty Bell, Valley Forge. So it was something that I was always sort of drawn to. And I started out, I interned for my current colleague, by the time he was a freshman state representative, Frank Farry, when I was going into ninth grade. And I really had the bug back then. I did some work for Councilman O'Neill, who I'm very close with. So I was always interested in it. I never anticipated that I would be state senator at 29. There's a whole story behind how that came about, which we could talk about. But I was always drawn to it. I was fascinated with it. I always admired the beauty and the elegance of the American experiment.
So that was the idea. I mean, Georgetown's an excellent institution, but did you have political aspirations at that time when you said, yeah, let me go to school in D.C.?
I mean, dreams, hopes, fantasies, right? I was always drawn to it. I always was fascinated with it. I was always studying it, reading about it. And thank goodness I was, because it would be very hard to be a senator at my age if you hadn't been preparing yourself since childhood. And it's weird too, because as a kid, I never really understood totally why I was so drawn to it, what that motivation was. I always thought it was cool. It was uncanny almost. And now I look at my life and I think it actually makes sense that if I hadn't done all those things, if I hadn't prepared myself the way I did, if I hadn't studied it the way I did, if God didn't frankly just kind of put that in me, that drive, that interest in it, then I wouldn't have been in a position to, run for office like I did and win like I did. Yeah. And now it almost looking back, it feels like there really was a mission. There really was a vision behind it that, hopefully that put me in an opportunity to really do something transformative for my neighborhood.
Do you still kind of walk into the halls of Harrisburg and say, I just still can't believe I'm here?
Well, it's been a bit of a trial by fire. Obviously we had the tragedy of the plane crash. And I think since then, I mean, just kind of being called there, being there all weekend, talking to the first responders, being there with the mayor, all the other electeds. I think since then, I've really felt like a senator. It feels very real when you're there in a crisis like that. Before that, there was definitely a lot of kind of pinch yourself. A lot of it takes going from being unelected to elected is a big transition in life. And you're senator elect, it's kind of murky. It's like, am I a senator? But yeah, I think since then, that's something I've just noticed in the last week and a half. I really do feel like a senator now. But the first week or two, yeah, you feel kind of like, yeah, it's something you're adjusting to.
Yeah, it's so. A lifetime ago, a Joe Picozzi lifetime ago, I had been living in South Philly, and through Young Republicans met this woman in Allegheny County who was running for the Senate. And so then this young Republican herself becomes State Senator Melissa Hart. And in 1994, her chief of staff was a fellow named Phil English. And Governor, or soon to be Governor Tom Ridge, was Congressman Tom Ridge. So a series of dominoes fall. The congressman from Erie decides he's going to run for governor. Melissa Hart's chief of staff had been city controller. He decides to go back to Erie to run. And a friend of mine, who's a friend of Melissa Hart, said, how would you like to be Melissa Hart's chief of staff? And I said, I'm from South Philly and she's from suburban Pittsburgh and the capital's in Harrisburg. But he said, come and I said, well, I met Melissa because we had actually taken a group of Philadelphia YRs to go canvass in the North Hills. So I go and do that. And at the time that you may remember, we were at a unique moment in time where the Democrats controlled the Senate because Lieutenant Governor Mark Singal was the tiebreaker. And so the Senate Republicans sort of were nice to Melissa, but it didn't really matter because they weren't in the majority. Well, I was there when the federal court case happened, and the federal courts determined that, in fact, Bruce Marks had won the seat in Northeast Philly, and Bruce Marks took over. So we had a staff meeting of all the chiefs of staff, and they explained to us, like, Bruce Marks is coming tomorrow, is going to be sworn in, and we're in the majority because now we have 26. It's no longer 25-25. And I laugh as Joe's explaining this because what happened, which took me some time to understand, and Melissa too, is that as we went into the majority, Melissa had to chair a committee.
Right.
And because we were 26. And all of a sudden, the staff people for the leadership, the president and the majority leader, I noticed almost on a daily basis would come by and visit. So how are things going? What are you guys up to? Thinking of holding a hearing? How'd you see that new bill that was introduced by Senator such and such? And it took us, because Melissa's only like a year older than me, but it took us a while to understand that they were checking in on us and mentoring us and making sure we weren't doing anything wacky or crazy, because now she wasn't just the minority leader on the finance committee. She now chaired the finance committee. And what were we going to do? And that was sort of our baptism, is that getting acquainted to the way that Harrisburg works, but then everybody understand, okay, well, this is now no longer a game because we're in charge. Now we have to be serious. Like, we were practicing. It was preseason. Now that we're into the real season, you better, and I wore a tie.
Well, I got to follow up with Joe. Are they checking up on you? Do you find you're getting more attention than perhaps you thought you would get?
Leadership or?
From leadership.
They've been great. They've been really great. I mean, I love Kim and Joe and Scott Murray. One of the best things about this Senate is it's so collegial, and everyone treats each other with a level of respect. It's an awesome place to work, frankly. And Dave Argel is great. I really, really am building good relationships with my colleagues. I wouldn't say, I think it's more that they want to see me succeed. I would say that. But I think they also trust me and my judgment, and I think they have a lot of faith and confidence in me. So it's not like they're, it's not like they're showing up at the office every day. How's it going? You know what I mean? But I definitely know I can lean on them for support, for advice, for mentorship, frankly, with help with my priorities. And I feel confident that they understand the needs of Northeast Philadelphia.
Have you been able to get in a little jabs about the Eagles versus the Steelers yet? Or Wawa and Sheets?
There was a lot of that on the floor. There was a lot of that. Sharif Street was really funny about it. Yeah, we did a little, my first remarks on the floor, actually. So Sharif did in petitions and remonstrances, some new words I've learned, which is basically sort of like the open comment. He read this thing about the Eagles, and before he did it, he told me, he's like, "Oh, I'm going to do this. You should tag on." I was like, "I don't know. I've never spoken on before." So he finishes up. And he's kind of looking at me. He's like, "Oh," I was like, "Okay." So I got up to the podium, and I was just like, I concur with Senator Street's remarks and wanted to add, "Go Birds." And so those are the first things I
as a true Northeast Philadelphia. That's outstanding. Yeah. I love that.
And that will be forever, right?
Go Birds. So, tell me a little bit about the experience of running for the seat. I mean, obviously, Philadelphia is not known for electing Republicans, but you were able to make headway and achieve a great victory.
Thank you. I loved it. I loved doing it. All my friends and family know how much I loved the campaign. I love meeting people. I love being out there in the community. I love knocking doors. We're going to be back out knocking doors once it warms up a little bit. I mean, I loved it. And it's a privilege, frankly, just getting to talk to so many people, to have them welcome you into their home, to have them open up to you. This is what I've seen change in the neighborhood. This is what I'm concerned about. This is what matters to me. And some people just want to talk too. Some people are lonely. You have people, you knock on the door, and I always say, "What do you want to see change? What do you want to see improve?" And people say, "My husband's died, and I don't know what I'm going to do." And you just hug them, and you're there for them. I mean, it's so meaningful. And so I love doing it. And I've really enjoyed it. I mean, I could walk through a narrative of it or however you want me to go about it, but it was a really special experience because you learn so much about your home.
I think that was one of the things I read about, was just the fact that it was that personal contact that people do look for from whether it's a candidate or their elected official to step up and show that you're interested. And apparently you were able to make those connections.
Yeah. People feel like the government doesn't care about them. And I think so much of it is showing people that you do care, how much the Northeast means to you. It's my home. It's our home. I'm going to fight for it. And people in my home, we don't care about party. We care about the person. Right. We care about the person. And we care about where somebody's heart's at. And you almost fall more in love with your home in a really special way. Now whenever I'm driving around, I think about, this person I talked to on this block. Like, you see your home in a different way. That's irrevocable, and really, it really shapes your heart.
So when I've run for office, what I always take away is exactly what Joe said. And when you talk to elected officials who I think do it right, the takeaway is not the floor speech. and it's not the battle over issues. Like there may be a thing that makes you tick. It's school choice. It's the environment. But the thing that you take away and will stay with you 5, 10, 20 years later are those interactions door to door, those interactions when somebody invites you into their home, or those interactions, again, like on TV, you know, for those that have been around, like you see on TV, even on C-SPAN, and people running for president, they go to a fair in Iowa. What you don't necessarily see is that when you go to the fair and you're walking booth to booth, as Joe said, at some point, as you're sort of, hi, I'm running for X and here's my flyer, is that every once in a while, somebody unburdens themselves. Because in fairness, they don't really know who you are and they don't really understand what you're running for. You're somebody with a presence who's doing something official, and they want to tell you how their daughter overdosed on fentanyl, or they used to run a takeout, restaurant, and because of COVID, it closed down. And I think, one, like as a human being, if you can't stop and listen, you're in the wrong business. Nope. But two is, I think, is everybody around you at that moment is then looking for your body language in your eyes, right? Because at the end of the day, you may agree or disagree about abortion. You may or disagree about school choice. But for that, like for those 7 minutes, that person wants you to understand, stand in my shoes. Yeah. And if you can do it, I think you become a better legislator, because a week or a year from now, when they have a discussion about a criminal justice bill, or they have a discussion about how to deal with abandoned properties, you're not, with all due respect, you're not going to give the Georgetown economics answer. You're going to say, when I was standing on Marcellus Street, here's what I learned. And let me tell you about the family that lived next to the abandoned house for 7 years and how their heating bills were too high and yada, yada. I mean, that's what it really does. It crystallizes all the policies into real life. And if your eyes and ears are open, it makes you a better public official.
So obviously, coming from Northeast Philly, you have some issues. You talked about wanting to improve the area. What are the 2 or 3 things that you'd like to start off with to try to help out your constituents or help out in Harrisburg?
Public safety. You're going off what Guy was talking about, and going through my head as you're speaking, I'm thinking about, 4th graders at St. Matt's, where I toured just 2 days ago. And I'm asking, what do you want to see change? What do you want to see improve? And all these kids are saying, well, my mom won't let me cross the street because too many people speed, right? I wish I could walk to my friend's house a few blocks away, but I can't. These are 4th graders. And that's heartbreaking. That's not what Northeast Philly was like when I was a kid. Right. It was completely safe. We didn't have to think about anything like that. My childhood was idyllic. And my dream and my vision is to bring that back. And it's not just safety. Safety is the floor. Sure. Right. And that's why safety is my top priority. Because if we're not safe, everything else
really matters at that point.
And being 99% safe is not safe. Safe is safe. Safe is you don't have to worry. It's not, you probably don't, you don't have to worry. So that's the foundation. But beyond that, right, when I think about the great Northeast and what the Northeast can be, what it has been, what it can look like in the future, I want the block parties back. I want fun community building events. I want people to know everyone on their block, the strong, tight-knit sense of community. That's why we are the great Northeast. What parish are you from? Right? It is tight-knit community. And some of that you can just do as a civic leader. It's not even legislation. It's rolling up your sleeves and organizing, right? Getting the block parties together, doing fun things, building community pride, community spirit, having more murals, more public art, more fun things to do in the Northeast. More fun things for kids, more after school programs, summer programs. That's a lot of my vision, is really just robust community building and bringing the neighborhood together. And the Northeast has changed a lot too. It's now the most diverse part of the city, right? And so thinking through challenges like, how do you build that tight-knit sense of community that we had when I was growing up? A neighborhood where people might be speaking 2, 3, 4 different languages on your block. Right. How do you do that?
So when you look at education, let's go in that direction. What would you like to see happen in the great Northeast? Can you move it forward while also looking back and saying, I'd like it to be how it was when you were growing up?
Right. Well, a lot of it, because history moves in one direction, right? And so it's, how do you recreate the feel and the needs and the safety and the sense of community in a different time, in a different era, an era where we have iPhones, right? So you take those values, but you have to sort of bring them about again. Now, on the education piece, one thing I'm a bigger believer in is summer jobs, after school programs, vocational programs. Kids need wholesome things to do. right? And a lot of it's about connecting kids with mentors, role models. I think those summers are so important in secondary education because there's no other time in your life where you get 3 months to test out an industry, right? So we want to work to bring together kids with employment opportunities and summer jobs and things, productive things to do, right? And also, frankly, it keeps them out of trouble.
Right.
So that's a big focus of mine on education as well. Something I'm really passionate about is literacy. So you're thinking more third, fourth graders. There's been a huge learning loss with COVID. And it was a problem before that. I think fundamentally the school system needs to teach kids how to read. In the economy of the future, you might not need, every single subject, but you're going to need to be able to read. You need literacy, right? And we're thinking about the jobs. These kids are working jobs that don't exist yet, right? They're probably going to be feeding AI models and having them build things. So they need to be able to read and write. Like that is the critical thing. Another thing schools need to teach is respect for authority and how to function in a society, right? How to play well with others, how to be a civil person, how to, when the teacher says sit down, you sit down, right? That's social formation. I also think kids need more options in their schools. They need more electives, more opportunities to find their passion. Every kid needs to find at least something that they connect with, something they feel that they can be good at, right? Something because when you feel like you're not succeeding, you don't want to show up, you feel demoralized, you want to act out and try to get attention some other way. But if you just have one thing, one teacher that believes in you, one teacher that kind of gets you into something, you're like, okay, I actually could be good at this, right? Then you feel like you want to be there. Then you feel like that's my thing. That's what I could, build a sense of pride and identity off of. So helping kids find the thing that clicks with them. And touring the schools, I toured 2 schools this week, and I talked to a lot of kids about government and politics with the hope that, maybe a couple of kids would say, hey, I like that, right? And I did have a few kids reach out to me and say, hey, and that's one of the most amazing feelings. And so I hope to be somebody that can help, young people who are interested in government, politics, community organizing, things like that, get involved and be engaged in their community.
You were absolutely a role model for those kids at this stage. You got to think about it. When we were in school, perhaps we learned a little more about civics, but I think Senator makes a good point there does need to be more electives to allow kids to be able to figure out what their path should be or could be.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing, particularly in a place like Philadelphia, is making sure that people have competency. That they can, right? That we're putting people on a trajectory to succeed, right? We're one of the poorest cities in the nation. Yep. And one of the ways you break the cycle is to make sure that the young boys and girls in kindergarten, in elementary school, in high school are learning. And that we not harm them by this false sense of compassion of lowering the standards. Right. I always say, I wish the basketball nets were 7 feet high because then I could dunk too. Right. Yeah. But you're not really doing me a service, right? Because I'm not going to be a professional basketball player. And for our kids, I think too much is been this, you say sort of the bigotry of low expectations. Yep. These kids are poor. They're from minorities. They live in a neighborhood where mom and dad were poor. They're going to be poor. Well, the answer is not, the answer is not to give them a fish. It's to teach them a fish. And it's to believe that all the kids in Philadelphia can learn how to read and write. But secondly, to build off of Joe's point, is more and more the high school should be thinking, not simply, when you and I were in grade school, the idea was to make sure the American dream was available to every kid and that every child could go to college. And we sort of shifted from every child in America should have the opportunity to go to college to every child in America must go to college. And some people are $300,000 in debt because they were there and they weren't sure why. I think we're having a correction. So not only teaching them the soft skills and the responsibility, but being exposed to work. I think that high schools more and more should be preparing, letting kids have dual enrollment, let them take classes in college, let them go and work and mentor. I mean, in my mind, the state has started down this path with some of the recent legislation, but high school students should be encouraged to go to a shadowing experience, to go to an internship, to work in the summer. Again, as Joe was saying, like maybe you like it, maybe you don't, right? One of the ways you find out that in fact you don't want to be a plumber is go do it. But one of the ways you say, this is really cool. Like I can go, someone can bring their car here and at the end of the day, it leaves and it works. I like that sense of reward. So I think we can do both, right? The reading and writing, but also preparing them for the workspace and understanding that it's not, okay, my frustration, it's not a resignation of defeat when we say, hey, Johnny's not going to go to Villanova. they're going to go learn to be an electrician. Right. That's not a defeat, right? You can be a millionaire. You could run a business. You can take care of your family. But my point is, if to Joe's point, if that's where a young man or young woman finds their passion, then let's feed that passion.
Yeah. Would you agree? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and this culture of pushing people to college is, frankly, it's almost prejudicial, right? It's almost prejudicial. It's exploitative, at a class level where working class people are, have this aspiration and they think this is the right path, and it's not. I remember I just graduated and I was back home, and I was at like a house party in Ronhurst or something. I was talking to a kid I went to middle school with. And he said, "How you been? It's been a minute, and I just graduated from school. You think you're on like the right path, right? But meanwhile, I'm broke. I'm making no money. I'm in all this debt. I'm like, how you been? And he's like, oh, I've been an electrician for 4 years now. I just bought my first house. I'm engaged. He's got everything together.
Right.
Yeah. And you're just like, I think I did the wrong thing here. And so I think that by pushing, and there's so much to do to build too. There's so much real material work that needs to be done. There's so many places, even in my district, that I think need to be revitalized. There's so much work to do. So I think it's not even just equalizing, it's almost glorifying the trades and glorifying, especially glorifying joining law enforcement, becoming a first responder. We're having a huge recruitment crisis. I think we need to do more to get people into, the police, frankly, to recruit, and more EMTs as well.
Well, certainly, growing up in Philadelphia and in your life experiences, have you begun taking in the fact that the Commonwealth is so large? I grew up in Huntington County, live in Lancaster County. So I've seen a little bit more than just the greater Philadelphia area, but now you have the responsibility not only of representing your constituents in the southeast corner of the state, but now you have to recognize where Lawrence County is, Greene County, et cetera, et cetera.
No. That's part of what's so beautiful about our system and the privilege of serving in a legislature is you get to talk to other leaders from other neighborhoods, other communities, and they're just as passionate about what's going on as you are, right? And you find things you can agree on. I visited a couple senators in their district. We just had a few senators come visit me, actually in my district just yesterday, and we brought senators in pretty much from all across the state, and we took them around Northeast Philly. We actually took them to K&A. We showed them what was going on there. Because one thing for me to go there and talk about what's happening in Philly and our public safety challenge. It's another thing to say, come here, let me show you. Let me show you what's happening. Come talk to the officers, right? Come talk to the police. Come talk to the first responders. And I was really grateful that they came, and I'm really excited to go see their districts as well. And I actually visited a pretty senior senator, Senator Argyle, and he took me to Tamaqua, and he was just driving around saying, this used to be this, and now it's this. Right. And it made me think, like, man, like if I really do this right, I can be doing the same thing in the future in Northeast Philly. Like it used to be this, but now it's this. Look what we did. Look what we did. That's my aspiration. So I have a lot to learn, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do it.
As you look at the divided legislature now, the Republicans are in control of the state Senate, Democrats. Still, it's 101, but most likely by the end of March, it will be back in Democratic hands. Have you experienced any of, lack of a better phrase, divided legislature so far?
Well, I'm from Philadelphia. Let's not forget, right? So I'm one of two Republicans that represent Philly in Harrisburg. So if for me to do my job, I need to really be able to work across the aisle. And I've spent a lot of time, and one of the big things I've been doing in the last 5 weeks, it's my 5th week as a state senator, is building these relationships, is getting to know people, right? I'm the only new senator that never held public office before. My 3 colleagues in my class, they came from the House. Right. So they sort of knew the players, they knew the personalities. I just got elected. So I'm building all those relationships. But I've got a lot of friends in the majority caucus in the House. I'm building those relationships. I'm hanging out with one this week. I'm not gonna say who. I don't want to say, but good person. Getting pretty close with them. And I mean, at the end of the day, I've been very impressed how many electeds are just good people who just care about their neighborhoods. They're not trying to promote themselves. They're not like the phony archetype of a politician you would think. They're good people who are trying. So I'm really excited to continue to build those relationships. But so far, so good. But I mean, I haven't gone through a budget season yet, right? So I'm sure it might be a little different if you ask me in 6 months.
It's interesting to hear him say that because I'm left to believe I haven't been involved in politics as long as certainly a guy has, but I almost get the sense that it's all theatrics, what we see on the floor.
Yeah.
Is that really what we're talking about here?
I think some of it is. I think some of it is role playing, but I do think that some of it, some of it's gotten personal and passionate. There's also, story for another day, but, for those of us who've been watching for a while, is used to say, use the football analogy. I don't know why football's on my mind, but use the football.
I wonder why. I wonder why.
Where are you going to be?
I'm going to be in front of the art museum.
In front of the art
museum.
Joe,
I'm marching.
The parade. You're marching. There you go.
So, right. But I mean, the game.
We'll record this is recorded, before that. But anyway, go ahead.
It's all good.
We're all good.
But no, I mean, but it used to be played between the 40s. Mm-hmm. Now we're playing end zone to end zone. And as I say, sometimes the players even run up into the stands and attack the fans, right? So I do think that some of it's for theater, but I think we're now really on raw nerve issues. So I do think that some of it is, you understand I have to yell and scream at you. But I think some of it is I'm yelling and screaming at you because I fundamentally disagree with you. Long story short, I use sort of natural gas as my benchmark. Right. A decade ago, when I was the chief of staff of the lieutenant governor, we had, in the 2000s, just sort of realized we could get the gas. And it was Ed Rendell that started us on the path, and then Corbett really opened the valve, so to speak. Pardon the pun. Maybe the pun was intended.
Well, not bad. But we'll go with it.
But the fight in Harrisburg in 2010, 2011, 10, 15 years ago was, okay, we've got all this gas. How do we tax it to make sure we get revenue? And the fight between the Republicans and the Democrats was whether to tax it, and if so, at how much. And that's how you sort of, Greg Vitale versus Joe Scarnati. And Joe Scarnati, let it flow, and Greg Vitale, we got to tax it. I hope that I'm representing them right, but Greg's a good guy. But my point is, that's not the debate anymore. Right. You now have, most Republicans saying, get it out of the ground as quickly as we can. We need it. Right. And most Democrats saying, this is ruining the planet and the environment. We've got to invest in other things. So again, if you will, in my world, a decade ago, we were arguing between the 40s. We're now end zone to end zone. We're not discussing how to tax, but how to do it. So I do think it gets hostile and passionate because if we're debating whether to tax it at 2 cents a unit or 5 cents a unit or not at all, we're all having a discussion. If I'm saying, well, what do we tax it at? And you say, I don't even want it to come out of the ground, and I can't believe you want it to come out of the ground. Well, now I don't know where we find, how do we go out afterwards and have a beer? Now, as citizens, we hope we do. We hope you guys do that. But I understand now that it's harder because the differences are more raw.
Do you mind? So I'm new to Harrisburg, and I can't comment on that. And frankly, maybe everyone's being nice to me because I'm new, right? So maybe I don't see all the tensions, and I'm sure as I stay there longer, I'll see things. But 2 points I want to make. One, where I'm from in Northeast Philly, the actual people, there is pretty much broad consensus of what needs to be done. Right, we need safe neighborhoods. We need stronger schools. We need, cameras. Right, we need to clean up the streets. We need to clean up our parks. It's very simple and straightforward. And there's a pretty much overwhelming consensus. We want to be able to afford to live here. Right, we want to be able to afford our groceries, afford our rent. So with the actual people, there's pretty much robust consensus on what's needed.
Right,
and finally, we need a DA that's actually going to prosecute crimes. Right? We can't just let people get away with absolute lawlessness. There's overwhelming consensus. I also think among young people, I think partisanship is getting much less intense. Mm-hmm. I think among young people, there's just a sense of like, I don't really care about the party. Who's the person? What are they all about? What's their deal? What's their motivation for doing this? What's their vibe? Literally, what's their vibe? So I think that, and I think that part of you have press, and there's always incentive to like tell a story about like people battling it out. It's fun, right? It's exciting.
It's what we do.
It's exciting. But I think most voters, like, just don't forget the national politics. Most voters, they will only follow it for 3 weeks, October of every 4 years.
Correct.
And then they're just like, how does this actually affect me? So my hope is that as things progress in the future, that we're going to see a lot more consensus building. And I think there's a sort of realignment moment where that new consensus is shaking out. And there's an opportunity to sort of shape it and be the leaders that can articulate it. But it's getting back to the basics, like safe streets, good schools, clean neighborhoods, right? Law and order, being able to afford to live here, to be able to afford the American dream, to be able to get on the asset ladder, right? Like that's the consensus. That's what everybody wants.
It's funny, quick story. So my in-laws live in Joe's district.
Yeah.
And our daughter...
Have you knocked on their door? Okay.
And our daughter, yeah, and I apologize, but to give it a sense, like, so our daughters take turns going up because they're in their late 80s, take them grocery shopping. So they actually ran into Joe at the Aldi where he was greeting customers and helping people in and out and carrying bags of this, retail stuff. Stuff they don't teach you at Georgetown or Harvard, right? But go in and get your hands dirty, right? But to Joe's point, here's the reaction. So our daughter takes my 80-something-year-old parents to the Aldi to shop. Mm-hmm. I get told that they meet him. And here's the anecdote. My in-laws, who are in their 80s, want to know, what party is he? My daughter, who's much closer to Joe's age, said, that was really cool that he was out there doing normal stuff. So, there's the...
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
He's doing normal stuff. That's cool. Whereas my in-laws, it's like, okay, is he a D or an R? Because that's it.
That's a great point. I want to get back real quick to the newness of it all, because from someone who would not know what you're going through, how much homework do you have at night? So when we talk about Reggie, or we talk about the legalization of recreational marijuana, or the natural gas issue, how much work do you have to do after hours to bring yourself up to speed, or have your staff help bring you up to speed?
It's a lot. It is a lot. You just got to take the job very seriously.
Right.
Right. I'm constantly reading. I'm constantly thinking too, and trying to come up with ideas and making sure I build time in my calendar so I can actually think critically about innovate. Right. I don't think I was elected just to be a cog in the political machine. I think I was elected to actually help reshape it. Right. To come up with new ideas, to help build what politics and government should look like in the 21st century. So I think, having space for that kind of creativity, but I really don't, I like my job. I like working hard. You know what I mean? And everything I do, it's a privilege to get to do it. It's a huge learning curve, but you learn by doing. Mm-hmm. You learn by being active. You learn by meeting with people, asking them questions, picking their brain, reading, looking at other states, looking at other countries too, and how they do different things. So it's a learning curve, but it's a very fun one. I also have a really good staff to help me with it. And they're brilliant. So yes, it's a lot. There's so many issues. And you mentioned the whole Commonwealth, right? There's issues that aren't really Northeast Philly issues, but I had to make decisions, on behalf of everyone. I had to talk to my colleagues and get a sense of why they support this or why they oppose that. So it's a learning curve, but it's such a cool one. So I'm really grateful to get the chance to do it.
I think it's going to be fascinating, Guy, to watch the whole budget experience. Certainly, some of the things you talked about for Northeast Philadelphia, it's going to cost money to help to bring it in. For the most part, we are seeing Republican-controlled state senators saying governor's pushing too much. You request 7% more spending than you did, last budget. Something's got to give. So how's this all shake out? So
the answer is we'll see. The answer is we'll see. What is clear is this week, not to get too in the weeds and too geeky, but the independent fiscal office, sort of the financial watchdog that gives everybody the rules of the game, said, look, if we keep spending, all the money we had saved is going to run away, which again, for a family, you said, we're going to put $5,000 away in case for a rainy day, in case the roof leaks or in case our car breaks. Right. Okay. Well, what if you keep ordering pizza and buying more and more apps on TV and downloading more movies? And before you know it, you're down to 3,000, down to 2,000. And think of it that way. Somebody in the family says, we used to have $5,000 in case the roof breaks. We're now down to $1,000. We can't keep downloading apps. We can't keep doing, ordering pizza every night. Well, that's in essence what they've said, which is we can't keep doing this, or all the money you save for an emergency is gone. Right. And so we are really at the rubber meets the road, because we're now at this large wish list. And one of the dangers in the governor's budget is when you project a budget and you look to the various constituencies of the state, and it's sort of that Oprah moment, there's a car for you and a car for you and a car for you. And you say, we're going to give Philly more cops, and we're going to give rural Pennsylvania more job training, and we're going to help the farmers, and we're going to help here, and we're going to help there. And everybody says, you can't help everybody. Right. There's more. Yeah, right. There's more want to than wallet to do it. So look, I think it's going to be a challenge. So I think the challenge for Joe and the colleagues is not just simply the Democrat Republican side, but from my perspective, I always look, what are the people or places in need, but also what's the money you can invest that gets you ROI?
Exactly.
If you work in natural gas and you therefore get people employed and you therefore lower the cost of manufacturing and you create manufacturing, then maybe that's worth money. If you're helping children learn to read, then it's worth the money, because then those children aren't on a path to poverty. And I think, my bias is the more we look at spending dollars that create a return. But right now, I think the challenge is there's a group of legislators that now have made promises to people and they've got to pay them. Right. And a group of legislators that say, we're already spending too much money. And now there's and Joe's going to fix it all, because he's going to explain to them.
Well, that's good, Joe. Please tell us how you're going to fix it all.
So like I mentioned, based on the governor's budget proposal, it puts us in a real structural deficit, multiple billions of dollars. Right. And not to say we shouldn't be making critical investments where they're needed, but they need to be investments that are going to pay dividends. It's really a question of prioritization. Right. It's a lot to sort through. You probably know I serve on the Appropriations Committee, so I'll be down there for budget hearings the next few weeks. So stay tuned for how we approach it. But I think that there's always room for making critical investments. It's just a question of what we prioritize and how we do it. But we can't be spending ourselves into a structural deficit that, frankly, my generation's the one's going to be tasked with the higher taxes to pay it off. That's what's going to happen. It's going to disproportionately affect us, especially in a time where we want to start families, where we want to start building a life, ideally here in the Commonwealth. And if our taxes go up, we've already lost so many people to Florida, to North Carolina. And those are states that have much lower taxes than we do.
And my son says the same thing. It's like, Dad, you were able to buy your house for this. Yeah. I'm not even close to being able to purchase a house as I'm in my late 20s. So like you said, it's the pocketbook issues that in the end, you talk about return on investment, but in the end, it's still, can I at least do as well as my mom and dad did? And I grew up thinking that, well, of course I was going to be able to do better than my parents. I'm not sure my son and daughter agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, look, the idea was that your kids would do better than you. And I think the last few years, the COVID years and post-COVID years, is really the first time that some of us of a certain age are beginning to say, are we really putting our kids in a situation to do better? Because that's, not to get out the violins, but that is the American dream, right? That you will do for your kids and that this generation will do for the next generation to put you in a position to succeed. And that's why, to me, I come back to thinking, Pennsylvania's had a stagnant or shrinking population my entire life, right? What do you do to change that? The truth is Joe's the exception. In other words, he's a young man that worked hard, studies, goes to one of the most esteemed universities in the nation, and comes back to Northeast Philly. That doesn't happen every day. As we sometimes gallows humor, Pennsylvania's greatest export is our young people, right? The young students go off to universities. They go to Duke. They go to the University of Alabama. They go wherever, and they don't come back. Conversely, we have almost more universities than anybody else. Yep. We bring kids in from the whole nation, get them their degree in engineering, biochemistry, whatever, history, and then they go back to Tennessee and North Carolina. So to me, one of the short-term problem is balancing the budget. The longer-term issue is to stop being a state that's figuring out how to tread water. What do you do so that the next Joe Picozzi says, I want to raise a family here? Because all too often they don't. They go to Georgetown, they don't come back. Or the kids from Virginia that come here that go to Temple wind up getting a job in Massachusetts, and we were just a pass through. And I think that's, to me, the longer term challenges. What do you do to make Pennsylvania a place where people say, I want to be there? You and I remember 40 years ago, nobody was walking around saying, I'm going to go head to Austin because that's going to be cool. Right. Yeah. Now people say, I want to be in Austin. Well, what do you do to make Philadelphia or Pittsburgh the place that people around the East Coast or the nation are saying, I want to be in Philadelphia because things are getting done. That's going to be fun.
Yes. Well, that's exactly it. When we talk about investments, Philadelphia consistently polls as one of the top destination cities for Gen Z. Mm-hmm. Young people want to be here. They're excited about Philadelphia. If we can make Philadelphia a place where, almost again, Mecca, a really fun city for young people to live that is a lot cheaper than New York, right? Where you can have a really interesting lifestyle. You can meet really interesting people. You can have amazing food. There's fun things to do. And most importantly, it's safe. it's safe, because so many of these people, their parents are really worried about them. Right. But where it's safe to live, where it's clean, where it's beautiful, we have a public transit system that works well. Right. And if we can do that, and that's where I think if we're thinking about the population challenge and we're thinking about retaining people, really investing critically in Philly is, in my opinion, the best long-term place for our Commonwealth, especially with 2026 right around the corner, when million plus people are going to visit Philly for the first time for the World Cup, for the 250th. There's never been a more critical time to invest in the city of Philadelphia.
You make a good point, Guy. The number of young people that you hear will say things that grew up in the Commonwealth and will say, I want to go attend the University of Alabama because I want to be there on an SEC football Saturday.
Right.
But then they don't come back.
Right.
And what can we do? Because you have the technological hub that Pittsburgh is becoming, all the strengths that Philadelphia has. Yeah. And then it kind of begs, since I'll be the guy in the middle of the state, what can we do between, let's say, Harrisburg and Greensburg? Yeah. I think that's also one of the big challenges we have.
I think some of the smaller cities are also being revitalized. I'm chairing the Urban Affairs and Housing Committee, and one of my goals of the committee is to tour not just their cities of first class and the second class, but tour a lot of cities and look at what are they doing right. And there might be lessons there that I could frankly reapply in Philadelphia. So we have a really cool archipelago of cities of all different scopes and scale. And I think young people generally want to live in cities, but they might want to retire, in towns too, right? So I think we have a really good kind of social, cultural architecture for people to spend their whole lives in the Commonwealth. And on the point of attracting young people too, you have the jobs. You got to have the jobs that can sustain them, that can enable them to build a family. You have to have the affordable housing. Frankly, if you want them to settle here, they have to buy a house here. You need to have the right kind of schools that they want to send their kids to. So it's a whole kaleidoscope of challenges, but it's nothing that we can't get done.
Sure. If you think of it, if you set an arbitrary goal, and again, I want to but I sort of do the back of the envelope. Right. If we started increasing the number of Pennsylvania college graduates that stayed here by 20%, right? We're going to lose a percentage because some of them grew up in Minnesota and they want to go home.
Right.
But the downside is when they grew up in Minnesota, they came here to Pitt, and then they go work in North Carolina. Right. Well, the only thing that drew them to North Carolina was a career, was a future. So we should do that. We have the energy. We have one of the most diverse economies of any state, with agriculture, biopharma, life sciences. I mean, we should be able to be a mecca for anybody. What do you want to do? You want to work on farms? You want to create the farms of the 21st century? Yeah. This is the place to do it. You want to be involved in engineering and in energy? It's here. Life sciences, it's here. Tech, it's here. Yeah. We've got to do a better job to create the jobs. But we have the energy. We have the universities. But, I just say, how do you begin to solve the problem? Lose less kids and keep 20% more. And it's the jobs. And as Joe said, all the cities. It's not just Philly. Yep. It's not just Pittsburgh. It's Lancaster that doesn't look like it did 20 years ago. It's much more, Lancaster looks more like Brooklyn than it does Lancaster years ago. Right. Yeah. So it's how do you, and not, again, it's not necessarily the case that Jim Thorpe should look like Lancaster, right? Or that Johnstown should, but each city has its own merits, but you've got to create a downtown vibe and a feel. And this is a place where entrepreneurs say, you want to meet the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings that say, I can tell you what a revitalized Lock Haven would look like.
Right.
You say, okay, we want you to stay here. We'll figure out how to get it done.
Let me ask a couple of quick questions. We talk about revitalizing the Commonwealth, bringing businesses back. We talk about the corporate net income tax and how it's slowly coming down. Mm-hmm. As it gradually decreases to the 4.9% that everyone wants, you take a look at the optics of the minimum wage being at 7.25%. Mm. Shouldn't perhaps the minimum wage be on a sliding scale as well? Is that something that people acknowledge is holding the state back in your mind?
I don't think people move to a state for, minimum wage jobs, right? So I don't think it's that part of the challenge, but it's been a long time. It's been adjusted. My colleague, Senator Laughlin, put forward an interesting proposal. It's something I'm interested in. But I don't think that's something that's critically holding us back from attracting top talent to the state. I think that there's a lot of momentum towards taking a look at it, but what that actually ends up being, well, stay tuned.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know if it was more of an optics thing, because you look at all the surrounding states, the neighboring states that are hiring. And like your colleagues, many of them have said, people are making more than that now. Mm-hmm. What's the optics of moving it up?
Right.
But whether it's that, whether it's recreational marijuana, which I know Senator Laughlin's also been kind of vocal on as well. What kind of things, I guess, could we do in that respect to just make it optically, Pennsylvania is more attractive?
Well, I don't think that recreational marijuana is going to be the thing that does that. I think that,
for example,
I think that showing off that it's a fun place to live, that making it an affordable place to live, showing off that we offer so much. I mean, I've had some of the best food in the world in strip malls in Northeast Philadelphia. Right. And you go in these restaurants and they don't speak English and the menu's not in English and you have to kind of find someone and say, hey, what's this? And they're like, that's steak. I'm like, I'll take that. But it's amazing and it's affordable. You can have a quality of life in Northeast Philly if you sure have nowhere to go and you're a young person. It's pretty neat. And so I think, but we're not really marketing it like that. Right. So I think part of it is just showing to people that like, hey, this is a really good place to be. I think there's certain tweaks we can make, you know, I mean, I think maybe in certain like downtown corridors, especially with 2026, right? You might want the liquor license adjusted to stay open a little later because people are coming from all around the world where they're used to a later nightlife. I don't think that should be across the Commonwealth, but I think in certain specific downtown districts, that'd be really beneficial.
Yes.
Right. I think there's certain tweaks you can make. I think there's, you know, even just accessibility, you know, keeping, you know, making sure it's easier to get around, you know, making sure it's easier for people to find the right places to live. But I think that it's more fine tuning and marketing and making sure it's safe too. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's probably the biggest thing that scares people off, at least from moving to my city, is the safety challenge. And then beyond that longer term staying, it's improving the schools. So they want to raise their kids there. But I think we can actually really fine tune those two things, safety and education, and then really have the right marketing bit. When 250th is going to be the best time to market our city.
It absolutely will be. You mentioned something about just transit, moving people around. Where do you come down in SEPTA funding?
Well, we're studying it very closely. And it's something, I mean, stay tuned, you know, but that's something you talk about preparing yourself. You know, I didn't campaign on transit. Right. So it's something I've been digging into it and trying to learn everything I can. I do anticipate playing a big role in what ends up coming about, but just stay tuned. No.
Yeah. It's a challenge because it's expensive to move people from A to B.
Yes.
And at the same time, it's relying more and more on people from other states or other parts of the state paying because it's expensive to move people from A to B. I think the challenge is it's a mode of transportation for people who disproportionately are either younger people moving about in Center City, or it's working class folks getting from North Philly to Center City or from Southwest Philly to South Philly, right? But if it costs, you know, the question is, and I say this sort of rhetorically, if it currently costs $12 to get someone from Southwest Philly to South Philly on a bus, one, why does it cost that much? So what can be done to get it lower? But two is you step back to philosophical, and it's the headache that, you know, Joe has as a state senator is of that $12 fee, how much should the rider pay? How much should other Philadelphians pay? How much should Pennsylvanians pay? You know, you go back because he's going to go, you know, meet a colleague from Huntington County,
right,
and there's going to be a guy that runs an auto body shop, and that how much money should come out of his paycheck or her paycheck because somebody in Southwest Philly is, you know, a nursing tech at Jefferson,
right,
and says, I have to get there. Right. And I don't mean to just throw up my arms and say it's complicated, but my point is it's a lot more complicated than just should they get more money, because the reality is the money's coming from somewhere. And whether you're taking it from the state police or you're asking people to dig deeper in their pockets, it's a challenge. So I think it starts with what can be done to lower costs. You know, I would, again, go back to something like a one-trick pony. If I'm not talking about school choice, I'm talking about natural gas. But, you know, what if SEPTA ran on natural gas that was in Pennsylvania?
Right.
Is that $12 ride now a $9 ride? And how does that change the equation? And I know that takes money and that takes infrastructure. You got to retrofit the buses or buy different buses.
Sure.
But again, I think there are Republicans that, you know, Senator Picozzi can be in that position of the lynch. Okay, how do you get Western Pennsylvania legislators and Northern Pennsylvania legislators to care? What if we move SEPTA's fleet to LNG? What if we use Pennsylvania? And they're going to need upfront money, but in the end, the costs are going to be lower. And by the way, they're going to run on fuel that folks in Potter County and Susquehanna County are going to get out of the ground. Now everybody's winning.
Okay, now let me finish up with some hard-hitting questions. Who's your favorite Eagle growing up?
Ooh, probably Brian Dawkins.
Can the Phillies make the World Series this year?
Yes.
How? I'm a diehard Phillies fan.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out. I'm listening to the podcast on the way down here. It's just like they're running it back. Is this the year they break through?
We'll see. I mean, we can't be choking in these game sevens, right? We can't be losing the playoffs. But I feel good. I really do. I feel like people are just. I mean, we're just riding off a high from last week. Maybe I really am from last weekend, but I think it's possible. I think it's just going to be, and you have to have things break your way, and you always have to get hot at the right time. I mean, that's a lot of baseball. It's getting hot at the right time. Yeah.
I'm a lifelong Buffalo Bills fan. I don't share your love for the Eagles, but I can say thank you very much on behalf of every Buffalo Bills fan for beating Kansas City. When did you guys feel? I remember, I think it was like 1990, first or second time the Bills won the AFC to get to the Super Bowl. They beat the Raiders 51-3, and I just loved the entire second half. When did you feel comfortable? When did you say, yeah, it's done?
When we were up 34-0. And I hope everyone listening to this doesn't forget that we were up 34-0. I mean, the score is misleading. That was 40-22. We exposed them. We really did. But yeah, at that point, it's kind of like, yeah.
Did you feel a little more comfortable before 34-0, or did you need that?
The touchdown to Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah, the touchdown to Smith, because at that point you had shown Hurts and the Eagles offense. I mean, the defense was playing out of their mind. I mean, the defense is on a scale of, the steel curtain. I mean, they're on an all-time defense. But at that point, you said, okay, well, now the defense is clicking. The short pass is clicking. You're getting just enough on the ground. Hurts throws, a 60-yard pass, and you're like, okay, well, now we're clicking.
That was on the money, too. Oh, my goodness.
It was a beautiful thing. Look, but I'm a lifelong Philadelphian, so I felt better there. But I'm quickly cheering and then looking at the clock, because I remember, 7 years ago, I didn't really believe 7 years ago till Brandon Graham strip sacked the ball.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I said, it was the first time I thought, not it's over, but this is really possible.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're playing the clock. You're like, okay, they'll probably get the ball one more time. But that was just like, that was such a wonderful play. So I am a Philadelphian at heart, right? You're excited, but you're always looking. So the Smith, but then you look at the clock, and you're like, we're probably safe, but it is Mahomes.
All I know is the Eagles played so well. Yep. I was kind of glad Buffalo wasn't in the when all was said and done, because that would have been hard to take. Hey, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you both stopping in and having an opportunity to chat. Wish you the best of luck in year one. It will be an exciting time, I'm sure, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
I love that. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. I enjoy it. And the more I get to know Joe, the better. I followed him as a columnist and lived vicariously through my in-laws meeting him at grocery stores. And I think it's exciting because it's not only as a Republican, but you can sense the energy that he's bringing to the job. And so I'm looking forward to really, really hopefully.
Well,
thank you.
If he's able to convert that retail politician that you were able to show into doing some good things for Northeast Philadelphia, they'll be very lucky to have you as a senator. Thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you.
And that will do it for Voices of Reason. My name is Steve Ulrich. Join us next time. Thanks for listening.